All right. Hey guys, this is it. We are talking about the Second World War. Now, first, we're going to have to lead up to it. So, we're going to begin with lesson one, the rise of the dictators that are going to cause this war. Make sure you take out your journal, please. Make sure that you are writing your heading right now and get all that good stuff. Remember to pause if you need more time. Don't forget to write the essential question. So, we're going to be talking about in this lesson Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. We're going to be talking about Hideki Tojo and Emperor Hirohito of the Empire of Japan. We're, of course, going to be talking about this guy you probably know with the little mustache, Adolf Hitler, and the rise of the Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazi Party. We'll be talking about the Benito Mussolini, and we're not really going to talk about this guy too much, but that is Francisco Franco. He was the Spanish dictator in the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. All right, so let's begin, please. Remember that the stock market crashes on October 29th, 1929, and in the next following years, we have a cycle of people losing their jobs, bank failures, and whatnot. And we end up in a Great Depression in the 1930s. And this Great Depression is a worldwide phenomenon, and it was triggered by many factors, not just the stock market crash. Remember, as we talked about, it was actually begun back by many policies from the 20s and goes as far back to the Treaty of Versailles and World War I. Of course, nobody called it World War I when it first happened because there wasn't a sequel yet. We're talking about the buildup to the sequel, World War II. So people back before World War II, they called World War I the Great War. And in that war, Germany had agreed to a ceasefire, an armistice on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918. The German soldiers, the German army, laid down their weapons. And then in the following year, in 1919, all the politicians of all the countries involved in the Great War got together and hammered out that Treaty of Versailles. Some of my students this past week during our review, they have pointed out that the Texan way of saying the French palace and gardens of Versailles is to say Versailles. Don't ever call it that. You'll sound super Texan. Okay, so the Treaty of Versailles. And in the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was blamed almost exclusively for the First World War, even though we know it was really caused by the ultimatum that Austria-Hungary gave to Serbia over the assassination of their prince, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Regardless, France and Britain, they really wanted Germany to pay. They wanted them to pay for all the death that the German military had caused fighting in those trenches on the Western Front. So Germany, being given most of the blame in the war guilt clause of the Treaty of Versailles, is going to have to pay enormous reparations. That is your debts, like all the damages, all the death and carnage and destruction from the First World War. Germany's been put a number on that. They got to pay it. And remember, this is billions of dollars worth in today's money. Germany didn't actually finish paying off their reparations, their war debt from World War I until 2010. Like you guys were alive when Germany finished paying off its war debt. That was from this treaty from 1919. And so Germany is having its best land stripped from it. The Rhineland, the industrial heart and sector of Germany, is taken from it. Its colonies and territories are stripped and taken from it. Its military is demobilized and reduced dramatically. And so the German people find themselves with all this debt they have to pay back to Britain and France and no way to generate any income. And so the government, the Second Reich, or the Weimar Republic, as they are called, is going to just start having to print off money as a means to pay back this debt. And remember, what's the problem when you just print off money like that, right? It's inflation. There becomes too much money and money becomes worthless. It loses its value. And that is the case for Germany in the years between World War I and World War II, especially into the 1920s and into the Great Depression itself in the 1930s. Germany was already in a depression because they had all these issues from the First World War. And so the people were starving. They were using this worthless money, like in the streets, kids were playing with it. Remember, women were using it to light stoves. People were using it, to wipe their butts for toilet paper. It was worthless. And so Germany is desperate. They're coming from a place of desperation, and that's going to be the climate that allows a madman like Adolf Hitler to rise to power. And I say madman, he was very calculatingly politically astute. Um, he did some things that were extremely radical, yes, but he was calculatingly, cunningly, politically brilliant, if nothing else. So this is going to pave the way for a new type of dictator, like Hitler, like the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, like the communist dictator in the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin. We will call these men who will take complete or total control of their nations. We will call them totalitarian dictators. This is the idea of totalitarianism, when you have a single person in complete charge of everything in the government. There's no separation of powers, there's no checks and balances, there's no multiple different parties running against each other, there's no freedom. This is totalitarianism, complete dictatorships. The first one we're going to look at is going to be in Russia. Russia was a member of the Triple Entente, the Allies, the good guys in the First World War. And remember that Russia had to leave the First World War in 1917 when the Bolsheviks, the communists led by Vladimir Lenin, rose up. The workers were sick and tired and fed up of the Russian monarchy, the Tsar Nicholas II and his wife and their kids. Remember Anastasia, little Nikolai? They were sick and tired of the Russian leader basically always putting his own interests before his country and before his common people. And so the common peasants and the workers of Russia rose up in a communist revolution in 1917 and took over their country. And they fought a civil war and eventually were able to complete their victory by 1922, turning Russia into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, otherwise known as the USSR, or in layman's terms, the Soviet Union. And we're going to be talking a lot about the Soviet Union, so a couple things you need to know. It is a communist nation. What communism means, it's a type of economic and political system of government in which you have all the means of production, meaning all the business, everything that people are working on and for, everything is controlled by the government, okay? So there is no private industries, there is no company that is owned by an individual. Everything is owned by the government, meaning the government gets to decide where everyone works, how everyone works, and how much everybody gets paid. This is again part of this idea of totalitarianism. Now, the idea of communism itself is that the workers unite, they overthrow the established government of a country like they did in Russia, and then they take all the means of production, and eventually it should be distributed equally among everyone so that there are no more classes. There's no more rich, no more poor. Everybody would be equal. And that is kind of a utopic vision for how society should eventually be in complete equality. Now, that is the dream talked about in Karl Marx's Little Red Book, the Communist Manifesto from the 1800s, where the idea of communism comes from. But when you are having that revolution occur and the people rise up and then they have to seize all the means of production to distribute equally, who's going to do that? It's the government, right? Government, some leadership has to be established to distribute everything and to run the show and make sure everything's given out equally. And when a government has that much authority, it can very easily become corrupt. It can very easily become totalitarian, where you have a single group or a single person in charge of everything, like the Politburo, like the Communist Party was the only party, and it becomes a dictatorship with the leader of the Communist Party being appointed as the complete and total dictator. And that's how you get Vladimir Lenin running everything. And then he dies a little bit, you know, mysteriously kind of dies short. Not saying Stalin did anything, but Joseph Stalin, his right-hand man, because Trotsky was already out of the picture by then, Joseph Stalin will become the new leader of the Soviet Union in 1924. And Joseph Stalin, remember this man right here. Remember his bushy mustache. Okay. Here's his quote: "Death is the solution to all problems. No man, no problem." He also was famous for saying that people were like chickens. Basically, you just pluck them enough, they'll eventually, go away. He is not going to be a very nice man. He is a totalitarian dictator who believes in, spreading fear and terror to get people to do his way. My horse is doing something weird as usual. So Joseph Stalin becomes the totalitarian dictator of Russia, the Soviet Union, and he is going to use fear to maintain power. This is the era in the 1920s and early 1930s in the Soviet Union that you call collectivization. And this is where Stalin's going to kill anybody who disagrees with his regime, anybody who disagrees with the Communist Party, anybody who even looks funny at him, they're going to end up disappearing, okay? Going off to one of the Russian freezing cold Siberian concentration camps known as a gulag. And then once you were in one of these forced labor camps where you were forced to work to death, you either died from exhaustion from the freezing cold Siberian, winter temperatures, or you died from being shot because you refused to do something or they just felt like it. And so in total, there are going to be about 15 million Russians. It's estimated. Could be more, could be less. We don't have accurate numbers, of course, but anywhere about 15 million Russians are going to die during this era of collectivization. And so, I mean, that is more people than died in the Holocaust. If you want to get technical about death, you could say that Joseph Stalin was even more of a mass murdering sociopath than like Adolf Hitler. But it's not a competition, right? So that is going to be with what's going on in the Soviet Union. Now, in World War II, the Soviet Union, believe it or not, they're actually going to be our ally, because there's this old saying, right, that says the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And turns out that Nazis and communists really hate one another. So we're going to team up in World War II to defeat the Nazis. But as soon as World War II is over, you can bet that we are not going to be friends. And that's going to lead into the Cold War. This is the flag of the Soviet Union, not with their faces on it. That's Lenin, the founder of the Soviet Union, and Joseph Stalin, who will take over and become the dictator. But this is the hammer and sickle, the sign of the Soviet Union, the Communist Workers' Party. And then right here, this is a very interesting photograph of, you have Joseph Stalin, right? And in the left picture down there, he's standing next to this young Russian ensign. And then in the right picture, it's the same photograph, but the Russian ensign has disappeared. Now, this is some early 1930s Photoshop going on for you. But it shows the case in point that anybody who Stalin viewed as a threat to his regime, they would just disappear. He literally wrote that guy out of existence. And I'm sure he disappeared into one of the gulags and was eventually killed, or maybe just shot, but that is the fate that awaited anybody who disagreed with Stalin's regime. The next dictator we're going to be talking about is Benito Mussolini. And remember that he is the Italian dictator because Mussolini rhymes with a lot of Italian pastas. It rhymes with a linguine. Mussolini rhymes with tortellini. Mussolini rhymes with, I don't got anything else, but there you go. Okay, sorry. Sorry to all Italian people out there. That was terrible, and I apologize. So Benito Mussolini is actually a reporter. Oh, by the way, Stalin, just a quick side note, Joseph Stalin was not born with that name. Joseph Stalin took the name Stalin, which means in, I think, Russian, probably, man of steel. So he gave himself that name. Stalin literally means man of steel. He's a scary dude. Okay. Mussolini was a reporter for the Italian kingdom during the First World War, and after the war, he's very disgusted with with Italy's role in the Great War. Italy had switched sides to try to get a better outcome and try to get more land on the Adriatic coast. During the Treaty of Versailles negotiations. So in 1915, Italy turned traitor and switched sides over from the Central Powers to the Triple Entente. And a lot of people in Italy were very demoralized, not only by their country, switching sides and stuff, but then in the treaty, which they had switched sides in the first place to get a better bargaining chip from, they didn't get what they wanted. And so they were feeling their country was very weak and it needed new leadership that would be a lot stronger. And that's where Mussolini comes in, promising to raise back up Italy's prestige and power, to make Italy again like the Roman Empire of old. Because remember, the Roman Empire was centered in Rome. That's the capital of Italy, modern Italy. And so he's promising to remake a Mediterranean empire for Italy, with, of course, him as the leader. And he begins what is known as fascism. This is really important. You highlight this term, understand what fascism means. Fascism is where you have a single dictator or personage kind of in charge of a country, and they're spreading hyper nationalism. Nationalism is when you have pride, or you identify with your country and you believe your country should be better than other countries, and you put the interests of your country over others. That is nationalism. And this hyper nationalism means you really become blinded to everybody else's problems, and you're like, Italy, 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 Italy's going to be the best. I'm going to make Italy the best. I don't care about anybody else. We're going to do what needs to be done. So ourselves, so we get ours. That's kind of fascism. And authoritarian is kind of another word for like a really strong dictator, kind of like in the same vein as totalitarian. Okay. And hyper militant, that of course means that you're going to try to exercise this nationalism by building up your military so you can be stronger than all the other countries, beat them back, take them over, and gain to the power and glory of your nation. So he promises to make Italy strong again. He's going to use violence to get his way. He had a secret police force called the Black Shirts, who, again, kind of like what Stalin was doing, would kidnap you in the middle of the night, and you would disappear if you were somebody who disagreed with Mussolini's regime. But overall, Mussolini and his hyper-nationalism, his fascism, and his dictatorship is going to organize Italy pretty strongly around the things he wants to do. So Italy weathers the beginning of the Great Depression a lot better than a lot of the democratic nations who were fumbling with this and that. And that's going to make Italy look really good. And it's one of the reasons why Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, they look to Italy for answers. They look to Italy for kind of a role model for what they want to be. And you can see Hitler side by side with Mussolini right there, marching together. There's Hitler, there's Mussolini. Hitler kind of looks up to Mussolini because Mussolini had been, doing what Hitler wanted to do a decade earlier. So now that brings us to the last of the dictators I want to talk about today before we get to Japan, and that's going to be in Germany. Okay, we talked about how there's a lot of resentment in Germany over the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I, how it forced the Germans to just start printing money to pay off their reparations. Well, because many Germans believed that their military had not been defeated, that it was the politicians that lost the war at the negotiating table at the Treaty of Versailles, many Germans start to blame their German government for their defeat in World War I. And that German leadership, the Second Reich, is called the Weimar Republic. Germany had a dictator, a king, a monarch, during World War I named Kaiser Wilhelm II. Kaiser means like king in German. And so he had abdicated at the end of the war, leaving this Weimar Republic in charge. The Weimar Republic had many business ties and even some Jewish leadership. And so in 1919, Hitler becomes part of the Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party, who was using this message of blaming the Jewish influenced Weimar Republic for all of Germany's problems, for all of the starvation and the reparations and all of the defeats and embarrassment and suffering that Germany was undergoing. The Nazis start to blame their government, this Weimar Republic. And you can see in this cartoon right here, you have I covered you have the Weimar Republic with this Star of David. That's the symbol of Judaism, the six-pointed star. And it's stabbing this German soldier, this World War I German soldier. You can see he's in the trenches, right? And there's the barbed wire of no man's land. The Weimar Republic Jewish man, you see he's drawn with very stereotyped large Jewish nose and everything. He's stabbing the German soldier in the back, showing that Germany felt like they didn't lose the war on the battlefield, they lost it from their politicians, that these were the ones to blame for all of their troubles. Hello, Arthur. Are you going to cry some more? Yes. Okay. Um, and so that's how the Nazi Party starts to become very successful. And Adolf Hitler, by 1921, 1922, is the leader of the Nazi Party. He'd been a soldier in World War I. And saying a soldier is actually a little bit too generous, because Hitler had actually been like a message runner. He was kind of scrawny. He was born in Austria near Salzburg, where like the Sound of Music movie was filmed. And the events of the Sound of Music also took place with the Von Trapp family and all that. But Hitler, born in Austria, dreamed of becoming an artist. There's a famous story how his dreams were dashed when he went before an art panel for college admission, and they rejected him. And there were some Jewish members of this panel that rejected him, and so we blamed them. And of course, Jewish is also part of Hitler's hypocrisy, because he's going to be talking about the Aryan race being superior, blonde-eyed, big-boned, strapping German people. Blonde-eyed, did I say that? Blue-eyed, sorry, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, strapping big German people being superior, the Übermensch, the Aryan race. This is part of the Nazi Party's social Darwinism. But we're going to get all to that in a second. But basically, Hitler is going to rise up to power, blaming the Weimar Republic for all of Germany's troubles. He gets arrested in 1924 and spends 5 months in jail, where he writes this book with some help. It becomes a bestseller. It's called Mein Kampf, My Struggle. And so he gets his name out there. Millions of copies are sold, where he basically lays out his plan to make Germany great again, to lead Germany to a Third Reich, which will become the Nazi Germany. And then in 1933, he is chosen as the chancellor or leader of Germany. And in 1934, he takes over all the power of the government for himself, eliminating all systems of separation of powers and checks and balances, and basically secures his dictatorship. So by 1934, Adolf Hitler is the dictator of Nazi Germany. And we're going to talk more about this, but keep in mind that the German people, they wanted Hitler. There were many Germans who didn't, or were ambivalent, meaning they didn't really care. They didn't get involved. They heard Hitler's ideas, and they knew that he was radical. They knew that he was extreme, and many didn't agree with his ideas. Not all German people were on board with what Hitler was talking about, because Hitler was talking about literally eliminating all Jewish people, or anybody that was undesirable. Anybody that stood in the way of Germany's future grandness would be eliminated. And so lots of Germans, they just viewed this as rhetoric. Oh, Hitler's just saying this to get elected and stuff. And they didn't really stand up to him. They just kind of allowed him to be chosen by people who were more radical. And when good people do nothing, you end up with evil taking over. And that is what happens in Nazi Germany by 1934. You can see the picture of the German dollars being swept in the streets, used for different stuff. Again, German money was worthless because of the hyperinflation due to the reparations from the Treaty of Versailles. All right, I know I went too far, but this is some important stuff to know in the lead up to World War II. Thank you guys for listening. I will talk to you later. Don't forget, this is part of your notes you should be writing down. This is not the end of the lecture, so you don't have to do the summary yet. Okay, thank you. Bye.